Bitter criticism. Maybe Russia is destroying Ukraine. Let's see what's happening. I guess that's happening. Ukraine is gambling. Ukraine is gambling. That will be the headline. I guess. Ukraine is gambling. I didn't heard by this time. Inside Russia, there is the channel. I don't remember this guy, but I don't like this guy. I guess he's Russian, and I really don't like him. I don't remember his name, but by this time I recommend you. I guess he is the best channel by this time, because well, is an Ukraine is a Ukraine attacked. Is a Ukrainian attack. Why Zelensky suddenly talking about holding a referendum? Who said this? Sergei Mirkin. Well, unfortunately, Timur Fomenko is just vanished. Timur Fomenko vanished for good. I'm pretty serious. Sometimes I joke, but Timur Fomenko is really my favorite analyst. I miss you, Timur. What happened to you? Why you vanish? It's just for me? I will not bite you. I don't bite. Anyway, why Zelensky? August 7, 2024. Home, Russia and former Soviet Union. Why is Zelensky suddenly talking about holding a referendum? Throughout the Minsk process, Ukrainian officials became masters at stalling for time. Talk of a new referendum is most likely preparation for repeating the strategy by Sergei Mirkin, Donetsk-based journalist. We have a photograph. Vladimir Zelensky in London, in England. The head of the Kiev regime, Vladimir Zelensky, said in an interview with the French newspaper Le Monde recently, quote, Any question of Ukraine's territorial integrity cannot be resolved by a president alone without the Ukrainian people. It goes against the constitution of Ukraine. He added that such a plebiscite will be desired by the country's population. Interestingly, the mayor of Kiev, Vitaly Klitschko, a former great boxer player, a heavyweight, put forward the idea of holding a referendum on surrendering territories claimed by Ukraine. A little over a week ago, a number of experts and bloggers, seen as aligned to Zelensky's Greek cardinal Andrei Yermak, said that Klitschko wanted to deprive the commander-in-chief of the right to negotiate peace and was pursuing his own political goals by talking about such a vote. But now Zelensky himself is doing the same thing. It's correct from a legal point of view that territorial changes will be approved by an all-Ukrainian referendum. However, it is strange to imagine respect for the constitution from a person like Zelensky, who has usurped power and has refused to hold presidential elections. Also note that Ukraine has already held national votes, but the outcomes have been ignored. In 2000, for example, there was one on changing the country's system of power, initiated by then President Leonid Kuchma. But the result was simply ignored by the Rada parliament, and no changes were made to the country's laws. So it's naive to consider a referendum in Ukraine as an effective method of expressing the will of people. Instead, it's just a tool used by politicians to achieve their short-term goals. And in the same interview with French journalist, Zelensky also said such a vote was not the best option. But why did he raise it as a possibility and then not reject the idea of a referendum and territorial concessions in principle? Tommy, there are a few possible reasons. The prospect of Donald Trump coming to power in the United States cannot but worry Zelensky and Yermak. Trump promises to bring peace to Ukraine in a short time, and Zelensky's personal relations with the former US president and those between representatives of their teams have a complicated history. To say the least, it is doubtful that a phone call between the politicians will smooth all the rough edges and allow all the previous transgressions to be forgotten. Tommy! So, what should Kiev expect from its patron in the US Democratic Party now? Well, the multilateral prisoner exchange last week between the US, Russia, Germany, and Belarus is a bad signal for Kiev. First of all, it has made their repatriation part of Kamala Harris' election campaign, and this is a blow to one of the pillars of Trump's campaign, his promise to bring home US citizens held in Russian prisons as soon as he became president. It's not without reason that Trump has said that swapping bad deal for the US. The Democrats are trying to get ahead of the curve, and where they can, they are trying to make his promises irrelevant, while the political dividends from what is happening should go to Harris instead. It is therefore likely that the White House will try to deprive Trump of another of his promises, that he will quickly end the war in Ukraine before the election. The Democrats will benefit from putting the peacemaker's crown on Harris' head before the vote. Presumably, the Zelensky team has been informed of these plans, and they realize that territorial concessions to Russia will have to be made. Thus, they have prepared a plan in advance, whereby the transfer of territories to Russia will be approved by the population in a referendum, which Zelensky and Yermak believe will absolve them on responsibility for what has happened and allow them to remain in power. The second possible reason is that wars about the referendum are a message to China in particular and the global South in general. Following the visit of Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmitry Kuleba to China recently, Kiev is trying to demonstrate outwardly its commitment to a diplomatic solution to the conflict. For example, Zelensky has said several times that the war should end as soon as possible. In this context, the words about the referendum are meant to look like the preparation of a legal foundation for the conclusion of a future peace deal. But all this is a show, the main spectators of which, according to Kiev, should be the leaders of China and other countries of the global South. For example, Yermak said in an interview with Bloomberg that the second summit of Ukraine will be held in the Middle East, and securing China's participation is crucial for Ukraine. It is a major player that can really influence Russia. So it's very likely that Zelensky, Yermak, and others will say anything to get a Chinese delegation to turn up at the next conference. Talk of peace, of course, will be a smoke screen. In reality, Kiev's rulers will try to escalate the conflict, seeing it as the key to their political and physical survival. Tommy, there is a third option. A referendum is seen as necessary to delay the peace process. During the Minsk process, Ukrainian officials became adept at finding reasons for delaying the implementation of agreements and eventually walking away from them with the blessing of their Western masters. The referendum is a preparation for a repeat. Let's simulate the situation. During negotiations, Zelensky agrees to make territorial concessions to Russia, but says that he needs to hold a national vote to approve this decision. On this basis, he asks for a ceasefire because preparations for a ballot must take place safely throughout the territory controlled by Kiev. Then the process begins to drag on. First, the Central Election Commission of Ukraine is unable to solve some organizational problems. Then a political files a lawsuit challenging the decision to hold the vote on the grounds that it threatens Ukraine's territorial integrity. Then the security services may be organized and terrorist attack in a Ukrainian city, killing people involved in preparing for the vote. Kiev blames Moscow, saying that Russia is afraid that the Ukrainian people will vote against giving up territory. The referendum will then be cancelled. Meanwhile, Kiev's army will have already gotten the rest it needed to the front lines. This article was first published by Vzhiglyag newspaper and was translated and edited by the Russia Today team. So I didn't pay much attention. I was, you know what I was thinking about? I was watching this Brazilian news, TV 24/7 as usual, and there was a Ricardo Neguton. He was presenting the show, the news show. He says, back in Brazil, there are private schools that you have to pay 40,000 reals, which is 10,000 real, $10,000, $10,000 for a subscription of kids. You know, I never will think about that price. You know, it's too much expensive. That is just too much expensive. That's the world we live in, and well, that's why we should make a Trotsky's revolution, a Maoist revolution. That's why there should be a second revolution in China. Oh, look, FBI raids Scott Ritter's house. August 7th. This is from today. August 7th, FBI raids Scott Ritter's house. The Russia Today contributor is reportedly being investigated as a foreign agent. Definitely. I'm sorry, Scott. I'm sorry, Scott, but what do you want? FBI agents raiding Scott Ritter's home in Bethlehem, New York. I guess Scott Ritter should move to Russia. Anyway, federal agents and state police have searched the house of former U.S. Marine and UN Weapons Inspector Scott Ritter in New York State on Wednesday. State police and FBI agents descended on the street of Bethlehem Township, south of Albany, around noon. According to the local outlet Times Union, they arrived more than 24 boxes out of the house just before 5 p.m. local time. The law enforcement executed a search warrant related to concerns apparently the U.S. government has about violations of Foreign Agents Restriction Act (FARA). Ritter told reporters gathered outside the house after the agents left. He denied any allegations of wrongdoing and said the federal government was trying to intimidate him. An FBI spokesperson confirmed law enforcement activity in connection with an ongoing federal investigation, but will say nothing further. Ritter is a former U.S. Marine Corps major who served as a UN weapons inspector in Iraq during the 1990s. He opposed the 2003 US invasion, insisting that Saddam Hussein's government did not have weapons of mass destruction, and Washington claimed it at the time. He has also been on Russia Today. He says but I guess it's a. He has also been a Russia Today contributor and saw his passport seized by the US government when he tried to attend the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum in June. Jim Hoffman, Ritter's neighbor across the street for 2 decades, told the Times Union that the former inspector has kept a low profile. Quote, when he came out against the Iraq war back in the early 2000s, he was vilified everywhere, Hoffman said. Honestly, he was right. He said there was no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Ritter himself has not posted anything about the raid on social media. His most recent post on Twitter was from Tuesday's meeting with independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. The administrators of his Telegram channel posted photos of the raid and said they have not heard from him either. Yeah, so the United States look like Brazil. Back in Brazil, there's a lot of chaos just like this. The federal police goes everywhere. Goes everywhere, everybody's house, just to fooling around, just to put some pressure. Some people said Scott Ritter will be a great U.S. president. Look, I have a news from Pepe Escobar. Pepe Escobar Telegram. The time for Moscow's concessions is in the past. This article was, I guess, is by Sergei Kyabkov. The era of Moscow's unilateral concessions is now definitely over. This is from yesterday, August 6. Experts from Russia Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Kyabkov's interview with Rossiya 1 TV channel, August 4, 2024. In accordance with the Gorbachev-Reagan agreement, the USSR and the US destroyed all their ground-based intermediate and shorter-range ballistic and cruise missiles, also committing to not produce, test, or deploy such missiles in the future. By 1991, the USSR had destroyed 1,846 missiles, while the US destroyed 846, meaning that the Soviet Union got rid of twice as many of its missiles. The era of Moscow's unilateral concessions is now definitely over. Never again, even under the best scenarios in our relations with NATO and the EU, which are currently hard to imagine, will we offer any unilateral concessions to the West. No handouts, gifts, concessions, or gestures to appease Washington. if the US attempts to impose something unilaterally beneficial to it again, there will be no agreements, period. It was once possible to reach agreements with Washington on a sound and reasonable basis. Some of them are still viable, especially on individual humanitarian issues. Tommy, but this does not change the overall picture. Negotiations can now only be conducted on a quid pro quo basis. The Americans understand this kind of talk quite well. President Putin's statement on July 28 at the main naval parade in St. Petersburg regarding the US plans to deploy American intermediate-range high-precision missile systems in Germany in 2026 essentially means that the unilateral moratorium declared by the Russian president shortly after the INF Treaty became history will cease to be in effect, and we will have the opportunity to restore the situation within acceptable limits for us, possibly not even reciprocally. We will ensure our security, and our adversary, the collective West, will not enjoy any unilateral advantages. We will not allow them to gain these advantages. Emphasis on Telegram channel on Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Transcript, machine translation. The time for Moscow's concessions is in the past. An interview with Sergei Kyabkov. On Friday, it was 5 years since the United States destroyed the foundation of global security by unilaterally ceasing to comply with the terms of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. In July, the United States announced plans to deploy missiles in Germany. Putin warned America 3 times. The answer will be ironclad. So how many seconds until the apocalypse? Olga Skabiva spoke about this with Deputy Foreign Minister of the Russian Federation, Sergei Kyabkov. Question: Where are we now? If you look at the clock of the apocalypse, Sergei Kyabkov, I will not like to say that we are in free fall. We are flying into the abyss. We are on the verge of sliding into uncontrollable chaos. Although this kind of epithet is increasingly coming to mind. Tommy, just 1 second. So, Tommy, aqui, Tommy. Tommy! Ven aquí. Tommy, venga. Venga. Aquí, Tommy, venga. Tommy, calma. Tommy! Maybe Tommy is freezing. I guess Tommy is freezing. Are you freezing, Tommy? Just 1 second. I will see about the. Well, this article is huge. Just 1 second. Yeah, I have. Well, this is a huge. You know who like this kind of article? Lagen something. Well, it's not so huge actually. I'm going to check this later, but I will tell you, it's freezing. The temperature over here, freezing. Look. Temperature. 9, well, yeah, it's not that freezing, but 9 degrees. 9 degrees. It's funny because they don't say the future, you know. Oh, 4 degrees. 4 degrees is terrible. I mean, very cold. I guess we are in 4 degrees now, I guess. So yeah, that's why I'm freezing, you know. My hands are freezing. Just 1 second. Doomsday. Yeah, look. We are flying into the abyss. We are on the verge of sliding into uncountable chaos, although this kind of epithet is increasingly coming to mind. I will say that the Doomsday Clock now shows something like 2 minutes to 2. This does not mean that their turn is irreversible and the clock will strike. Politicians and diplomats in the West and in the capitals under its control need to take a responsible approach to what is happening, and the military needs to keep the powder dry because the scenarios can be very different. Question: at the same time, you allow the deployment of missiles with a nuclear warhead in response. Who? I don't remember. Sergei Ryabkov. No, Sergei Ryabkov. At the same time, you allow the deployment of missiles with nuclear warhead in response. If the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, if our military says the special ammunition is needed on such and such carriers, then it will be so. But they must make this decision based on a combination of factors. I admit that there may come a time when this will be necessary. The third stage of the exercise to prepare for the use of non-strategic nuclear weapons has now begun. This is a powerful signal in itself. On August 2nd, 2019, Washington withdraws from the treaty on the elimination of intermediate range and shorter range missiles concluded between the USSR and the United States in 1987. In accordance with the Gorbachev-Reagan agreement, the USSR and the United States destroyed all intermediate and shorter range land-based ballistic and cruise missiles, while also committing themselves not to produce, test, or deploy such missiles in the future. By 1991, the USSR had destroyed 1,846 missile systems. The United States, 846. That is, Soviet Union could twice as many of its missiles. Question: Vladimir Putin comparing what is happening now with the same double decision in the 80s. What does he mean? At that time, Washington outplayed us and deceived Gorbachev. How tough are the current conditions for resolving the crisis? Sergei something. The time of Moscow's unilateral concessions is irrevocably in the past, never in the future. Even in the best possible circumstances in our relations with NATO and the European Union, which is now difficult to imagine. But even in these situations, no unilateral concessions on our part will be granted to the West. No handouts, gifts, concessions, any gestures to appease Washington. If they try again to impose something on us that is unilaterally beneficial only to them, then there will be no agreements just like that. Question: appease Washington. Sergei something. Ryabkov. Appease me? It's impossible. First of all, this is not our style. It was once possible to negotiate with Washington on a sound and reasonable basis. Something has been happening recently, especially in certain humanitarian subjects, but this does not change the overall picture. and you can only negotiate bash on bash. Sorry for such a term. Americans understand this conversation very well. A really tough conversation took place recently between the military departments. Russian Defense Minister Andrei Belozov called the Pentagon for the first time, and he said something that made U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin squirm. Quote from the New York Times: "The Russians found out about the secret operation of Ukraine against Russia, which in their opinion was approved by the Americans. Pentagon officials were surprised by the accusation and were unaware of any such plot. But whatever Mr. Bolusov revealed, officials said it was taken seriously enough that the Americans contract the Ukrainians and said, if you are thinking of doing something like this, don't do it. Kiev's operation, if it had happened, would have plunged Russia and the United States into an unmanageable conflict faced with 100% guarantee. Question: are there any details of this conversation? Sergei something. I can say that according to some indications, the signal that was sent by the Russian side to Washington, and I understand that not only to Washington but also to some other capitals controlled by Washington, has reached. We have avoided a new escalation round, but that particular episode is very disturbing. As is customary with them, it was planned in relation to our internal events in order to cause maximum damage and get the maximum media effect they needed. Here is that particular episode, which is called "We Have Passed." Thank God. That is the signal of our military leadership and the Minister of Defense to our American colleague apparently had an effect. Question: did they prepare something for the parade in Russia? Answer: I don't want to go into details, but in principle there was a certain connection with such events. The details of the audacious action at this moment are a state secret, and the parade in St. Petersburg are the thwarted provocation. Vladimir Putin makes a statement that is discussed by the whole world. Question: what does this mean in practice? Answer: in practice this means that the unilateral moratorium announced by President Putin shortly after the INF Treaty finally went down in history will cease to apply, and we will be able to mirror, or maybe not necessarily mirror, the situation in an unacceptable framework for us. We will ensure our security, and our opponent, the collective West, will not have any unilateral advantages. We won't let him get their benefits. We won't let him get these benefits. You know, I just going to quick this. No, it's been fine, but I want to know what's happening in Russia, because Russia will defend themselves. So, yeah, you know who like these large articles? Lejeune, something. He said this in a live. There is a teacher, Lejeune Mirhan. Teacher Lejeune. He said he likes these huge articles, but that's it. something is happening in Russia. Everybody knows. Russia Today should say something about. Yeah, look, this is a recap. August 7, 2024. Ukrainian incursion into Russia. What we know so far. An invading force of some 1,000 servicemen and dozens of armored vehicles has entered Russia's Kursk region. I didn't know this name. Well, I'm pretty ignorant about Russia, or just Russia geography. We have a photograph, Russian snipers. What happened? Early on Tuesday, the Ukrainian military launched a major raid on Russia's Kursk region, breaking through the border at multiple locations. The attack was focused on the town of Zutsha, located some 9 kilometers from the border. The town, which is the administrative center of the namesake district, has been subjected to continuous indiscriminate artillery and drone strikes. Heavily armed Ukrainian forces. This is a subtitle. According to Russian military estimates, up to 1,000 Ukrainian soldiers have been involved in the attack. The personnel broke through using dozens of heavy hardware pieces, including tanks of various types, US-made Stryker armored personnel carriers, and other armored cars and equipment. Advance halted. The fighting raged through the night, continuing into Wednesday, with the Russian military conducting artillery, aerial, and ballistic missile strikes on the advancing Ukrainian forces. The incursion has been halted, with the invading force losing over 200 troops and 54 armored vehicles, including at least 6 tanks. The chief of Russian General Staff, Valery Gerasimov, told President Vladimir Putin on Wednesday. Moscow's reaction. Moscow has condemned the attack, which President Vladimir Putin described it as a large-scale provocation, with the Ukrainian military conducting indiscriminate strikes on civilians, residential buildings, and ambulances. Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova suggested the attack is being used as a smokescreen for Kiev to prolong its deadly mobilization. Legislation prolonging the drive for another 3 months has quietly signed by Ukraine's Vladimir Zelensky on Wednesday. She noted, "What's next?" What's next? The Russian military is seeking to inflict a defeat on Russian invading force, pushing it back across the border, Gerasimov has said. Kiev appears to be anticipating a new cross-border offensive by the Russian military. The authorities in Kiev, the authorities in Ukraine's Sumy region, which borders on Kursk, announced on Wednesday the mandatory evacuation of civilians from areas within 10 kilometers of the border. That's it. So no more time for nothing, almost nothing. I'm going to see what's happening in Al Jazeera. Maybe because I guess I'm completely right about this. Iran, China, Russia. Tommy over here. Look at Tommy. Come on, Tommy. Come here. I'm sorry, Tommy. Look, even Tommy. They are all tough. Tommy's tough. The Russians are tough. Iranians are tough. Chinese are tough. But they all want money. They all admire Israel. They all are afraid of being pushed off the being how to release from SWIFT system. Everybody's afraid of being ejected from the SWIFT system. That's the whole truth about the world. All the rest is just propaganda. You know, everybody is afraid of being miserable and have no bread to eat. Burned to death. Israel strikes tents for displaced in Gaza South. Macron urges Netanyahu to avoid cycle of reprisals. Iran responds to reports it may hold off on Israel attack. Iran responds to reports it may hold off on Israel attack. Our colleagues at Al Jazeera Arabic asked the Iranian mission to the UN about reports Iran may hold off on a retaliatory attack over Ismail Haniyeh's assassination in Israel, agrees to a ceasefire in Gaza Strip. Here's their full response. Quote, "We have pursued two priorities simultaneously. First, establishing a durable ceasefire in Gaza and the withdrawal of the occupiers from this territory. Second, punishing the aggressor for the assassination of the martyr Haniyeh, preventing the recurrence of the Israeli regime's terrorist aggressions, and making the Zionists regret embarking on a such trajectory." Well, and now, as usual, I'm going to remember Daniel Jadue is being 2 months on prison because supposedly he bought medicines for the people. That's it. The far right, the right in Chile, the oligarchy are complaining about the price, but Daniel Jadue bought face masks to combat COVID-19. So what happened? What's the crime? What's the problem about that? Daniel Jadue is in prison of being a great consul, a great major, caring about the people.
Una nueva comunidad internacional, pero una comunidad de verdad democrática de naciones de carácter universal. Y Estados Unidos, la verdad que tiene, y yo espero que sea juzgado por la responsabilidad que tiene en los crímenes de lesa humanidad que se están dando hoy día en Palestina.
Le vamos a solicitar a nuestros queridos ayudantes fantasmas que por favor coloquemos una cortina para separarnos nada, 10, 15 segundos, 20 segundos y ya seguimos dialogando con Daniel Jadue en el Sin Maquillaje que llega a Chile y el mundo en sus redes sociales. ¿Tendremos la cortina? Si no la tenemos, seguimos adelante. No me voy a dar 2 segundos a ver si empieza la cortina. Daniel, muy bonito, ¿eh? Y ya que nos metimos en el tema internacional, en Argentina, Javier Milei está con el tema de la educación superior. Las universidades estatales argentinas se les va a cortar el presupuesto, creo que en 1/3, y salieron a las calles a movilizarse.
No, en 2/3, se le baja 1/3, ¿no? En 2/3, y esto es... Mira, yo nunca había visto el programa de Milei exactamente el mismo de Pinochet cuando... ingresó la junta militar después del golpe de Estado instalando la dictadura. Sí, el único problema es que los argentinos lo eligieron, uno no lo entiende. A nosotros nos tuvieron que bombardear la moneda para poder desarrollar este programa, pero el pueblo argentino, que yo de verdad con mucho amor, con mucho cariño lo digo, no sé en qué estaba pensando, lo eligieron democráticamente para desarrollar lo que Naomi Klein define con magistralidad absoluta en su primer libro, La doctrina del shock, un shock a la nación argentina. Yo creo que efectivamente no solo el recorte a esto, sino que el recorte de la ayuda social. Es bueno analizar, César, el discurso que ha instalado Milei.
Well, I just did my
Axel Kaiser, los republicanos.
I just did my yoga. I'm just waiting for the time for 47 time. Well, Daniel Jadue is not my theory is that he's in prison because this podcast, his channel of YouTube, he made this podcast. It was the best show in Chile. It's not a show, of course. It's a news program. Understand? It's a podcast. Yeah, it's a podcast. You know, it's not a deep analysis. You know, but it's very nice because it's not so deep. It's not so shallow. You know, it's perfect. It was the only way I could know anything about Chile because I live here, but the only thing I know for daily life is, well, dogs, angry bus drivers. You know, these bus drivers over here, they are terrible. Look, I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you something really, well, the same bus drivers that always complain about student tickets. They really have problems, you know. Look, they really have to run to compete within themselves. Look, this is a scene of two bus drivers running the city, and people are complaining, people are filming them. You know, this is the neoliberal reality. Bus drivers suffer. They have to compete for passengers. It's terrible. And well, above that, I know nothing about Chile. You know, this is just misery. People are selling secondhand stuff, trying to survive. Junkies, suicide. Chile is terrible.